Maverick News. The world is watching. In a universe full of ideas, we draw lightness from the dark to a place where opposites attract. Right meets left, positive touches negative, sparking an explosion of truth. Because politics makes strange bedfellows.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Strange Bedfellows, episode 36. I'm Lori Spencer. Rick Walker has the night off, but we have an amazing show for you tonight. I'm so excited to have this gentleman on. I discovered his YouTube channel a few months ago, I guess when the war started over in Gaza, and I was looking for alternative viewpoints. Ran across his channel called The Pulse of Israel. And I was very moved by what he had to say because it's a perspective that we don't get to hear enough, I believe. I think he's a great spokesman for the Israeli cause and a war that they believe is just and true. And I'd like to bring him in right now. His name is Avi Abelow, right? Did I pronounce your name correctly, Avi?
That's fine, Lori. Avi Abelow, yes, thank you.
Perfect. And you are joining us all the way from Jerusalem, where it's evening over there, pretty late. Thanks for staying up late with us.
It is my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on your show. And I'm actually in the Judean hills. From my porch, I overlook the fields of Bethlehem, and then over Bethlehem, we see Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. So I am a blessed Jew to be living the dream of my ancestors of thousands of years, to be living here in our ancestral homeland and raising my family and my children here in our ancestral homeland. So very, very blessed indeed.
That's wonderful. And you grew up here in America, right? You were born and raised, excuse me, in New York City, right?
Yes, yeah, born and raised in New York City. Actually moved to Israel when I was 16 and served in the Israeli army, which was actually a dream of mine to be able to defend my people living in my homeland after thousands of years that we were defenseless and being exiled and persecuted for thousands of years. And then got married and lived back in New York again and went to undergrad and graduate school in New York City, and was in New York City for 9/11. And after 9/11, we returned to Israel. Back then, we were going through another Arab Muslim uprising and terror back in 2001.
Yeah, it was the second Intifada. So you got there just in time for that terror.
Yeah,
so it's like you escaped terror in the United States only to come to Israel and experience more terror.
Yeah, which it's actually a good segue to what my voice is all about, as you said, Lori, because I try to help people all over the world. My program, The Pulse of Israel, is in English, and help them understand that Israel, we the Jewish people in Israel, we're on the front line of the whole freedom-loving world. Like, our fight is not just our fight. There's literally a Marxist Islamist crusade to destroy the Western world. It's happening right in front of our eyes. Americans are seeing it, or even if they're not understanding it. But America is being washed with socialism. It's a Marxist agenda that the KGB came up decades ago. And they created a whole new anti-Semitism by creating a fake identity called Palestinians back in the 1960s in order for people to hate Jews and want to destroy Israel. But it wasn't just about destroying Israel. It was about destroying America and destroying the America's hegemony over the world. So people do not understand that by us standing up against the Islamist terror and the Iranian terror and the Sunni terror here in the Middle East, we're actually the front line defending Americans and Canadians and French and British, because the Marxists have been working for decades to destroy those countries, and they're working together with the radical Muslims, who you could just look at France and Germany and Britain, what they've done to those countries over the past few decades, and they're starting to do it in America, and they're going to bring that destruction and the destruction of the Western freedom that you enjoy and love in the West. And I try to help people understand that we're not just fighting our fight to defend our lives, which is also important for sure, but we're fighting because we're the front line of the whole freedom-loving world against this Marxist Islamist agenda to destroy the freedom-loving world as we were blessed to grow up and know.
That's right. And, they make no secret of it. We've done several shows here at Strange Bedfellows talking about the Houthis, talking about Iran, and, they say it in their chants. And it's only now starting to be heard on this side of the ocean at some of our college campuses when they say, "Death to Israel, death to America, a curse upon the Jews, glory to Islam," right? And that got some people's attention over here in the United States. Finally, when they started hearing chants of death to America on our college campuses, a lot of people who were supporting Palestine said, "Wait, hold on. What is this really all about?" I think that was kind of a wake-up call.
Right. And I tell people all they have to do is look at the flags, not even listen to the chants like that also, but look at the flags that are raised at the anti-Israel, pro-Hamas, pro-terror protests, and then at the counter protests that the Jews and the pro-Israel supporters are. The Jews and the pro-Israel supporters, they bring American flags and Israeli flags. Look at the flags raised at the anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, pro-Hamas protests. They are Hamas flags, Hezbollah flags, PLFP flags, communist flags. You see the communist symbol being flown, and they are taking down and replacing the American flag. They are burning the American flag. It is so clear that this whole campus protest movement, they are using the Jew because we're an easy prey. We're a small people. We've been oppressed for thousands of years. We're the canary in the coal mine. But the bigger agenda is the destruction of America. And Americans, if you're not attuned to this, wake up. This whole protest movement is about destroying America. It's a revolution, and it's a revolution that's been in the making for decades. And all you have to do is look at the video footage, listen to what they're saying. They're calling to destroy America. They want intifadas in America. And they've been saying this for years. You have professors saying this for years on American college campuses, brainwashing your children or grandchildren for years to hate America and want to destroy America.
And speaking of these protests and the brainwashing that college students are getting from their professors, I thought it was interesting that you attended Columbia University in New York. When you were there, when you were a student, did you have professors that were teaching this kind of thing?
No, I was at Columbia back in 2000, 2001. Much different, 1999, 2000, much different world. There was beginnings of anti-Israel protests. And again, the people have to understand, Middle Eastern countries like Qatar and even groups in Saudi Arabia, they've been pumping billions of dollars into American universities for decades. They have bought out chairs, they have bought out departments, not a year or 2 years ago, for decades. Your children and grandchildren have been brainwashed for decades with socialism and Islamism, anti-America, anti-Israel messages. It didn't start today. And so when I was there, I remember, I think Columbia University invited the leader of Iran at the time, Ahmadinejad, to speak. And there was like a whole protest like that. How can you, that guy was, again, anti-America. He was already saying back then, this is 25 years ago, that America is big Satan and Israel is little Satan. So he was anti-America. He was pro-destroying the Jewish state of Israel and annihilating the Jewish people. And here you had Columbia University inviting him to speak. So that was something that was taking place when I was there. But there were no protests, and still whatever was taking place in the classrooms was still on a much lower flame. But it still existed. For instance, I just now rewatched a movie that I remember watching years ago. It's called Colombia Unbecoming or something like that. I forgot.
Yes, I just watched that myself. Yeah.
Right?
That was like 20 years ago.
2004. Now, some of those people interviewed, I know personally, one, the rabbi of Columbia for 35 years is my father-in-law. So I have a personal connection to the Jewish community of Columbia via him, but already 2004, he was already retired. Like, he built up the whole Jewish community of Columbia University for 35 years, and he was in that movie. And then a lot of the students who were interviewed, or friends of mine, or I was like an advisor to them when they were younger kids, and then they were students, and already they were talking about, again, 2004, how teachers and departments were already blatantly anti-Israel, and students felt like they couldn't open their mouths or they'd be punished, and they had no recourse, because if they'd say anything to the professors would shut them up. If they went to the department heads would say, oh, you're only saying that because you're Jewish and you have an agenda. And they went to the president, and the president was backing up the professors. So this is 25 years ago. So anyone who's looking at the mass protests on campuses today, it's had probably trillions of dollars of funding for decades. It didn't even start in 2000. It probably started in the 70s or 80s of oil money from the Middle East, and then from the Soviet Union starting from the 60s. Influencing right. American colleges. Americans have to wake up and realize this. And one very, very important KGB defector. I don't know if you've ever seen the video of Yuri Bezmenov.
Yuri Bezmenov. Yes.
So Yuri Bezmenov in 1984 was interviewed on, I think it was CBS, one of the nightly programs, and bringing everyone back to the 1980s. I mean, I was born in the 70s, so I remember television in the 1980s. You had either ABC, CBS, or NBC, right? There was no cable, no smartphones, nothing.
We're about the same age. I'm a Gen Xer too. I grew up with 3 channels.
Right, exactly, right?
Yeah.
So everyone was either watching one of those 3 channels. So you had like a third of Americans watching this program. And he was 1984. He was saying, and again, he was a KGB leader of the KGB, senior officer, defector to America, and he told this interview program, Soviet Union already had brainwashed one generation of United States professors of college campuses. They had an agenda to brainwash via the United States education system American students with socialist values and anti-American values, and they already brainwashed one generation of United States professors. And he said, the second we reach 3 generations of professors in colleges, the progress of destroying America from within is irreversible. He said this in 1984. We've had 4, 5, 6 generations of professors since then, and now you're seeing the chickens come home to roost. This isn't spontaneous or because of what's going on in Israel. They've been brainwashed for decades of Soviet brainwashing with Islamist money, and Americans have to wake up.
That's right. And I wanted to ask, since you were at Columbia, you were in New York City when 9/11 happened. You know, the college students
in Midtown. So.
Oh, yeah. And of course, I guess you had already graduated by that time, right? Because I remember the Columbia campus was
night school. Yeah, and I was working in the day as a consultant.
I remember that day. The Columbia campus, of course, was directly affected, by what happened at the Twin Towers. And today's college students, especially right there at Columbia, they don't have any firsthand memory of 9/11. They were babies or little kids. They have no firsthand memory of that. You and I grew up in the 70s and 80s when we remember hijackings that happened all the time by Palestinian liberation groups like the PFLP, right? Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and other groups, and the Black September taking of the embassy at Khartoum in Saudi Arabia, where they took several of our diplomats hostage and demanded the release of Sirhan, the Palestinian guy who killed Senator Robert Kennedy in 1968. That was their demands. Of course, President Nixon said nope, and they killed all of their hostages. But, young people, they don't have any memory of those times when hijackings were common. They don't remember the September 11th, 1970 wave of hijackings where PFLP took 5 passenger jets. 4, they were successful in hijacking. 1, they were not successful in hijacking, and that was an Israeli flight. That was an El Al flight. And that pilot was a hero because he knew how to deal with hijackers at a time when the West did not. So after 9/11, we got all this airport security and we started to do the things that Israel had been doing for decades at their airports. We had kind of snoozed on security. But, in the years since 9/11, these kids are very fortunate to have grown up in a time when skyjackings are practically unheard of anymore. And hijacking planes is no longer really a tactic that the Palestinians use or can use because security is so tight. But how do you think, Ari, that we can get the message across? I said Ari, it's Avi, sorry. How do you think we can get the message through to young people who don't have any firsthand memory of the things that we remember?
Wow, that's a great question. I mean, today's generation, I guess called the Tik Tok generation, it's hard to get across history when they can't even remember the video they saw 2 minutes ago because they already watched 10 other ones
Right.
while they're scrolling on TikTok. Believe it or not, what I believe the best way to get this message across to today's youth is not about teaching them history. I mean, for Jews and for Jewish youth, I believe it's critical that they understand their history to have pride in their identity. And that should be the same thing for American youth. It's not focusing on the horrors that we had to experience that they don't experience, but focus on the values of America that America were built on, and the stories of America, and the pride in America, so they can have pride in their identity, so that they on their own will be able to start realizing what's going on around them that is about destroying their proud American identity. I mean, for instance, I grew up reading books about George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, and I loved history as a kid, right? I like to say in my public talks how we were blessed to grow up when there were no smartphones. So when we were bored,
Yes.
I used to read books. Like I used to just go into the library or my own bookshelf and then pick out a book, and I loved history. There you go, right? Exactly. Like I've
Got
always
lots of them.
talked to my kids. Kids, I have so many books to read from. And they don't like reading books because
They're like,
prefer
books,
wasting time on the
boring. Why would
smartphone,
you want to
right?
read a book, Dad?
Right. So I grew up loving Jewish history and biblical history, ancient Jewish history, modern Jewish history, Israel history, the Israeli wars. I learned a lot about the Holocaust. I read a lot. So I was very, very knowledgeable of my Jewish identity, but also about my American identity. American history, Civil War. I was a Civil War buff. I love Civil War movies.
Me too.
Davy Crockett, grew up reading books and stories about Davy Crockett. Benjamin Franklin, all the different various American presidents. What America was built upon. What were the values? The Judeo values, the biblical values. The fact that the 10 Commandments were put up in courthouses across America, and why. So it's like American kids today, their identity is being stolen from them because the education system has been kidnapped and hijacked by the socialists in America. So for decades, your children, unless you send them to private schools, the public school system has been totally hijacked by anti-American values. They're not learning American history. They're learning why they should be a girl even though they're a guy, and why families don't matter, and why they shouldn't even have kids, and climate change, which is a big hoax, instead of learning about how to take care of America so that their grandchildren can enjoy the freedom and benefits of America and be proud Americans. So my message to American youth, and if they are parents or grandparents watching, just go back to basics and take responsibility for your own children's education and grandchildren's education. Stop relying and outsourcing it to the education system, which is not just doing a bad job, they're killing your kids. Like they're killing their souls and killing their pride and their American identity. And take responsibility. And you on your own, show them the movies that give across the messages. Give them the books that give them across the messages of what America was, what it was founded upon, and the values it was founded upon, and the freedom and how it is different than every other country. I mean, it's insane. You have kids growing up in America today who hate America, and then all you have to say is ask a question. Well, if America is so bad, why are millions of immigrants today illegally coming into America? Why are they coming to America? And why are they staying and not leaving? Well, it must be that
Yes, and
America's
why
not
are
so
so
bad.
many of them Palestinian and from Arab
And many Arabs, right?
nations,
We have tons of
right?
Arabs, and they're coming to destroy
Yes.
America. Whether with terror or without terror, they're coming to bring their own values. I mean, something I tell people they don't understand. And again, I don't hate anybody, and I don't hate any Muslim, and not all Muslims are bad, so no one should get the wrong idea. But people have to know Islam. Islam is not a religion. Islam is a political ideology about taking over the world, so the whole world are Muslims. That's why they go take over countries. And if they don't do it by the sword, they do it by the womb. And Islam, they go to, and they say this, you don't have to listen to me. Everything I say, check for yourself, double check, do your own research. They say this, you could just go to videos of imams in England because they say this in English. They say, we're taking over England. We don't have to use the sword. We're using our womb. They're not having babies. We're having 7, 8 babies because Britain, with the social system there, is giving them money to have more babies. So they're going to be taking over Europe. And then here's the thing. When they're a minority, they fight for minority rights. When Muslims are no longer a minority, then they push for Sharia law. Guess what Sharia law is, folks? No minority rights. It's
You're not going to like
to
it, folks.
Muslim rules. And the Muslim rules, women are second-class citizens, gays are thrown off of roofs. Like all your liberal values are thrown into the trash and you're treated like a second-class citizen. So beware when Muslims come en masse to your communities, because they are not coming to live as Americans and enjoy the freedom of America. Some of them might have come in the 70s and 80s, but America and Europe screwed it up. Instead of pushing back against the radical Muslims and shutting them down, no, it's all of a sudden Islamophobia. So you can't say anything wrong about any Muslim. So whatever Muslims actually escaped the terror and intolerance of the Middle East to enjoy the freedoms of the West, the liberal attitudes of our Western countries, their brains fell out, and it's allowing the total destruction of their countries because they're not even able to recognize and then definitely not punish the intolerance and terror within the Muslim community in taking over your communities and then destroying Western communities from within. So again, the point is, spend your time educating your kids what is the amazing values of being American or Canadian and the values your country were based upon, so that they have the fortitude and the common sense to figure out for themselves what's wrong and what's good. Because today, in today's politically incorrect, progressive, really regressive world, there is no good or evil anymore. And you could say, I mean, I'm a Bible.
Or it's inverted. It's like evil is good and good is evil.
Exactly. That's
how it seems to me.
Exactly.
And that's a point that we try to stress to our audiences when we try to teach about what life is really like in a place like Palestine, that there's a reason you don't see media coverage. You don't see Western media reporting from inside of Gaza. I personally know several journalists, Western journalists, who have been trying to get into Gaza to do reporting on the war for the last 6 months, and that Gaza won't let them in. Hamas controls the press. There is no free speech. There is no freedom of the press. And we see that now seeping into the campus culture, the protests. I'll tell you a story here on Maverick News. We've had one of our reporters attempting to cover a protest that's ongoing at McGill University in Montreal. He's been going every day for the past week. And you can go back and watch some of these shows and see for yourself. But you probably already know how it goes when you are not friendly media. They don't want you there. He has been trying for 5 days to get one of these protesters just to talk to him. He's not confrontational. He's not trying to be provocative. He's very fair and balanced. And he just asks, why are you here? What are your demands? Blah, blah, blah. The usual questions that you would ask as a journalist. And they refuse to speak to him. They are trained, they have media training to tell them to shut up, don't talk to the press. They hide behind their mask or the keffiyeh, and they just stare at him with this blank stare. Sometimes every day, we find that they are more and more hostile to our reporter. Because now they know who Maverick News is, and they've started to come after us and our channel. Literally last night, we had to take the show down off of all of our platforms because they looked up our phone number. We have a live call-in portion of the show, and they started calling in and saying obscene sexual things, and someone hacked our live stream, putting hardcore pornographic images on the screen for a few seconds before we took it down. And then we had to, of course, that's why they do it. They know that platforms would then censor our broadcast because we're breaking the community standards by having pornography on the show. So we had to take everything down off of all platforms. And it was obviously a very coordinated effort. And it started happening as soon as our reporter left the scene. And something kind of scary happened last night. Like I say, this keeps escalating. Every time he goes there, they know who he is now. And they surrounded him. And they all had matching umbrellas, big black umbrellas with a sharp tip on the end, which is that's a weapon. They surrounded him. They were trying to block his camera shot so he couldn't film the protest. And it's very intimidating. It's just like we've seen them do with Jewish students at campuses across America, where they all encircle that person and get real close. And it's a physical kind of intimidation. And they were so close to him, Avi, that the point of the umbrella was about to poke his eye out. Yeah. And again, that was deliberate. That was their way of saying, get out of here or we might hurt you. Fortunately, he has not been injured, but I'm starting to get concerned for our reporter's safety as he's covering these protests. So
it's interesting, specifically connected to what you're talking about. I just actually made a video and a post on Twitter talking about what you're referring to. And I wrote, what we have seen take place across U.S. college campuses and other campuses across the Western world with mobs of students is literally a zombie apocalypse. Educated college students, even from Ivy League institutions, are chanting slogans, repeating words, acting like nursery school children, acting like a scary mob, stopping, here I wrote Jews, but even reporters like you're talking about, from getting close to them and sometimes even using violence against them. And then I wrote, the scary thing is this is just the first stage of this zombie apocalypse. Ultimately, it's a Marxist Islamist revolution to destroy America and the West, the Jews and the Jewish state of Israel. We are just the canary in the coal mine. But that's what we are witnessing. It's there. You literally are a mob, and they're not able to answer questions. They won't answer questions. They don't know the information. Most of them don't even know what they're protesting, but
that's exactly right. I mean, have you noticed that they always have their phone in their hand when they make any kind of statement to the press? If you took their phone away, their script, which obviously they didn't write, they're reading someone else's words. It's scary to me when I see that. They're like automatons, like they're just completely brainwashed. It's a cult, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, if you'd let me, Lori, because I wanted to touch upon the usage of the terms Palestinians and Palestine. Yeah. Because I don't use those terms because they were made up, and it's very important for people to understand that if anyone goes to the archives of the press before 1948, again, for the people who don't understand, the modern state of Israel was only established in 1948. We're about to celebrate our 76th birthday. But I tell people, this is the third time the Jewish people have a state in our ancestral homeland. Anyone who knows the Bible, the first time was First Temple times with King David. And the second time we had our own state was Second Temple times. So this is the third time the Jewish people are back sovereign in our ancestral homeland. And if you go back to the newspapers, New York Times, whatever was before 1948, every single time the word Palestinian was mentioned, it referred to Jews.
It referred to Jews. That's correct.
Yeah, because there were no Arabs called Palestinian. There's no Palestinian Arab people.
Right.
They call themselves that today, and you want to call yourself that today? Fine. But I'm not going to let them get away with saying that they have a history. There's no history. It was the Jews who were called Palestinians before
Correct.
1948. Not only that, most of the Arabs that came to Israel before 1948 why are they called Arabs? They call themselves Arabs. Why are they called Arabs? Because they're from Arabia. They originated from Arabia and then spread. The biggest conqueror in the world, the biggest oppressor, the biggest perpetrator of genocide in humanity are the Arab Muslims. They started in Saudi Arabia, then they spread, and by the sword and forcefully converting and raping masses of people, they took over the whole Middle East and Northern Africa. They even took over Spain and Portugal for a number of years. That's Islam. They are the biggest perpetrators of genocide still today. I mean, I don't know how many Christians watch your show, but Christianity was born in the Middle East. Right? Christianity was born in the Middle East. It used to have a lot of Christians. There are very few Christians in the Middle East today. The only ones who live with freedom and equality are Christians who live in Israel as Israeli citizens. Christians living in Muslim countries are persecuted, and they don't have equal rights. The latest story that hit the news is the Copts in Egypt. They're always being persecuted and assaulted by the Muslims. So again, people have to understand Jews are called Jews because when we're Judea, that's the ancestral land of Israel, and Arabs are called Arabs because they're from Arabia. So that's the first point in terms of understanding. Like just go to the media before 1948. It was the Jews called Palestinians. No, they didn't exist. Then you open up, anyone who really wants even more information, anyone goes and reads the United Nations Partition Plan of 1947, right? Because that was the United Nations. The British didn't know what to do because the Arabs were killing the Jews, and we were trying to defend ourselves, and they weren't letting Jews come into the country. We were trying to escape the Nazis in Germany. So finally, the British said, we can't deal with this. They threw it to the United Nations. The United Nations decided, okay, we're going to split the land. If you read the language of the United Nations, it calls for the creation of a Jewish state for the Jews and an Arab state for the Arabs. There is no mention. This is the United Nations. No mention of any people called Palestinians or the creation of a state called Palestine for them. Well, if they existed, don't you think the United Nations would have written and a Palestinian state for the Palestinians? It didn't write that because they didn't exist. And then I'll go to data point number 3. Between 1948 and 1967, Israel did not have control over our ancestral biblical homeland. Again, Judea and Samaria, what people call the West Bank, that's the area that includes Hebron, Bethel, Shiloh, Jerusalem. Those are the cities in the Bible. Those are the places where the Bible stories took place, where the Jews used to live thousands of years ago, and Jews continued to live forever. But we did not have control between 1948 and 1967 in those areas. Jordan occupied what's called the West Bank because it's the West Bank of the Jordan River, but really Judea and Samaria. There was never a call for the establishment of a state called Palestine between 1948 and 1967. Why not? If they were a people and they deserved a homeland, self-determination, right? Why was there never a call? Not by the Arabs who lived here, not by Jordan, not by any Arab Muslim country, not by the international community. Silence. They were Jordanians. Right. They were given Jordanian citizenship. Don't you think if there was a people called Palestinians and they had a right to their own homeland, there would have been a movement for that to happen when it was under control of the Jordanians? And Egypt was in charge of Gaza between those years of 1948 and 1967. No one was looking out for the freedom of the Arabs in Gaza. And again, they're mostly from Egypt. No one cared about them. No one looked after them. There was no call for a state called Palestine. So people should not use Palestinians or Palestine because they were terms created, believe it or not, by the KGB.
By the KGB. That is absolutely true.
Yasser Arafat was trained by the KGB. He's Egyptian born, even though he's supposed to be like the leader of the Palestinians. He was born in Egypt, trained by the KGB, started in 1964. Okay, Israel was not in control of Judea and Samaria or Gaza, the West Bank or Gaza, Jordan and Egypt. Why did the KGB create a Palestinian liberation movement in 1964. Israel was not in control of these areas because, and again, a Romanian KGB agent a defector to the West, went on record talking about back in the 80s. The Palestinian identity was created by the KGB as part of a strategy to destroy Israel in order to hurt America, because Israel was the only non-Soviet country in the Middle East, and they were afraid of our connection with the West and America. So that was their strategy to weaken America's influence in the Middle East and destroy us. So anyone who uses the term Palestinian, you're using an invented term created by, meaning that Palestinian identity created by the KGB to destroy America and destroy Israel. Same thing with saying Palestine. There is no Palestine. There never was a Palestine. Anyone just do your history, Google it. There never was a state called Palestine. Believe it or not, the people who created the term Palestine, and here I'm a big history buff, so and I love people. It's so important to know history. The Romans created the name Palestine. Why did the Romans create the name Palestine for this land? Because, and again, anyone who says that the Jews have no connection to the land of Israel, well, do you not study Roman history? Study Roman history. The most successful rebellion against the Roman Empire was the kingdom of Judea. The Jews living here with our temple in Jerusalem. So don't you dare tell me that the Jews have no right to our ancestral homeland, Israel, that we have no right to Jerusalem, that the temple never stood here. Are you basically saying that you don't believe that the Romans existed and that the Romans once had control over the Middle East and that the Jews fought them, which is in the history books? So when the Jews rebelled, the most successful rebellion against the Romans, they took revenge against us when they finally beat us. And they destroyed our temple. And they expelled most of the Jews and took us into slavery all over the world. And they erased the name of our land called Judea, and in their maps, they replaced it with the name Palestine. And there were Jews still living here. So they were the first Palestinians because they were still living here when the Romans invented the term Palestine to basically show how they defeated the Jews, and the Jews no longer exist anymore because that's what they thought. Well, as we like to say in Hebrew, God has the last laugh. And the Jewish people, we have a God looking after us. It's the only way you can explain why we still exist today after 2,000 plus years of exile and persecution. We should have been gone ages ago. Every generation, there is another people that comes and wants to annihilate us and destroy us. We're still here, not because of luck, because you got to believe in God. We're a miracle. We are proof that God exists, because otherwise we wouldn't exist. So you fast forward all these years.
I want to, during our interview today, I want to debunk some false narratives, and you just did a great job on that one. Let's talk about this land back narrative that is so often parroted, saying that the Israelis came in 1948 and stole the land and evicted all the Arabs out of Israel and did a ethnic cleansing, a genocide. You know, these are the claims that have been made for a very long time. I know they're false. You know they're false, but a lot of people in our audience don't. So I'd like to start by asking, how many Arab countries are there in the world? I think there's almost 50. And yet, why are they so focused on this tiny sliver of land, what they call Palestine, what I call Israel, what the world has acknowledged to be Israel? Why is that one little sliver of land so important when they have so many places to go? Avi?
That's a great question. And everyone has to understand that what we are experiencing is a religious war. It's not about land. And like I said earlier on, this isn't a religious war of the Muslims against the Jews. This is the Muslims against all non-Muslims. The Christians, you're in their crosshairs too, folks. That's why they're out
I'm
to
the
take
Sunday
over
people.
Germany. Right. First the Saturday people, then the Sunday people. That's a Muslim saying. So like I always tell the Christians, wake up. Why are you siding with the enemies of the Jewish people when they're coming for you next? We're your front line. You don't stand for us. They're coming for you next. You are signing your own death warrant by not standing up strong and proud, supporting the Jewish people and the Jewish state of Israel. Because you're next. It's not Avi Abelow saying this. It's the Muslims saying this first. The Saturday people, the Jews, then the Sunday people, the Christians. So to answer your question, why can't they deal with this? The state of Israel is smaller than the state of New Jersey. We're a tiny state. We have 9 million citizens, smaller than New York City in terms of population. We're a blot on the world map.
So, and not only that, if I may, you're surrounded by enemies.
We're surrounded by enemies on all sides, except for the Mediterranean Ocean, right? On all sides, but billions of them. And again, what I like to say, like I said before, that the existence of the Jewish people is a miracle and proof that God exists. Well, same too, the existence of the state of Israel is another miracle and another proof that God exists, because they've been killing us for over 100 years. And I'll get to some of the other lies you mentioned before. They've been trying to destroy the Jewish state of Israel since the day that we came to exist in 1948. They are billions of Arab Muslims. They have big armies. They have the support of other countries in the world. And we're alone. I mean, even today, even though America is our biggest and strongest ally, right now, everyone sees the headlines. President Biden, who is not a friend of the Jewish state of Israel, showed his cards. He's withholding arms to Israel. We don't have any other place to get arms from. We had to sign over in the Obama deal that we get all of our arms from America. We can't make our own arms. We can't get arms from any other country. We get it all from America. And now, in the middle of a war that we're fighting to protect ourselves, to ensure that we're never massacred again, 1,200 innocent civilians, mothers, grandmothers, babies, mutilated, raped, burned in ovens. We have to stop to make sure that never happens again. And Biden's withholding weapons to not allow us to fight this war. And it's not just against Hamas in the south, but it's against Hezbollah in the north and Iran all around us with all of its terror proxies all over the Middle East. We're alone. And yet we still exist. We're about to celebrate our 76th birthday. We are a miracle. We are proof that God exists. So if any one of your viewers thinks that they're getting away with being anti-Israel and thinking that Israel rules the world and Zionists are evil, you guys have been brainwashed. You're choosing the wrong side.
It's just the opposite. As we're seeing right now, you see that it's actually the United States that pulls the strings and makes Israel dance to our tune, not the other way around.
Right, 100%. 100%. Right. I mean, people like to scream, APPAC controls Congress. Mm-hmm. Oh my God! First of all, some of the strongest lobbies in Washington, for everyone to know. First of all, is the medical pharmaceutical lobby. Everybody, yes, I'm on the same page as all of you. Medical pharmaceutical industry is killing America, killing the whole world, and it's the largest lobby influencing your politicians. So don't go after the Jews, go after the pharmaceutical industry. And yes, are there Jews working in the pharmaceutical industry? Yeah, just like there are non-Jews and Christians and Muslims and blacks, and everybody works there, right? Then you have the gas industry. Then you have the Muslim countries with their billions of dollars, and they might not have PACs like APPAC, but do you know how many of your think tanks in Washington are funded by oil money from the Arab Muslim world? Billions and trillions of dollars. So your politicians and your lobbyists pushing the laws are being influenced. So all we have is one little PAC called APPAC trying to give money to politicians, even Democrat politicians, that even some of them, even if they get money from us, they then turn on us. And you guys think that we run America? No.
But you know, that's old Nazi propaganda. You're a student of history. You know that was standard in Nazi propaganda. Hitler always said that President Roosevelt was controlled by all these Jews around him, that the United States was, controlled by Jews. And that much of the world, of course, he justified the killing of communists in the Soviet Union because they were all a bunch of Jews. That was always the big lie.
Right. So it's very interesting, first of all, that you brought up Roosevelt, because we just celebrate the Jewish people around the world, and especially in Israel, we just commemorated Holocaust Remembrance Day. Mm-hmm. And one of the most important facts that gets little attention is that none of the allies, America, Britain, none of the allies agreed to bomb the death camps or even bomb the railroad tracks to stop the Nazis from gassing and exterminating the Jews, tens of thousands every single day. Anyone who says Roosevelt was controlled by the Jews, you guys are nuts. Roosevelt did nothing to help the Jews. Not only did he let us continue to be killed, all he had to do was allow some planes to drop bombs on either the death camps or on the railroad tracks. He said, no, we're not going to use any planes to do that. Not only that, but he wouldn't allow any of the Jewish refugees come to America. There was a famous ship called the St. Louis. Germany at first did not want, the Nazis at first did not plan on exterminating all the Jews. They wanted to just kick the Jews out of Germany and get them all live other places in the world. So a ship called the St. Louis sailed out of Nazi Germany. No country in the world would take in all the Jews. From that one ship, I think there was 900 Jews. It ported at a couple of ports in America. It would not allow them to get off. They had to go back to Germany, and the Nazis took them off. And then I think there were a few hundred there were like 2 countries that took off a few hundred. The rest of them had to get off back in Germany, and they were murdered in the death camps. Very few survivors. And that's why Germany came to the conclusion, no country in the world wants to take our Jews. Well, we need a solution. And that's how they created the final solution to exterminate all the Jews. Anyone who thinks that the Jews have any power in this world as a people, that we run the world, you guys are nuts. Are there Jews in powerful positions?
I often say, if I could interject, I often say that, Israel didn't happen because of the Holocaust. That the Holocaust happened because there was no Israel. There was no place to go.
You're a smart woman.
Well, thank you. A lot of Israel's detractors, and they often throw this argument at me. They like to bring up the Havra Agreement of 1933, which they completely misunderstand. They say that it was the Zionists who were actually Nazis making a deal with Hitler to save their bacon, which is not really the truth at all. Could you refute that or debunk that?
You want to know something really interesting, Lori? Because our current event situation is the best way of debunking that. Because right now, Israel is negotiating with today's Nazis. Come on.
Precisely.
Palestinian Arab terror. Like you should never talk with Nazis. You should never talk with evil people who massacre you. And yet we're being forced to talk to them in order to save whoever we can save. That's what happened back then. They were trying to save whoever they could save. The Jews weren't working with the Nazis. So whoever thinks that is off their rocker. They were trying to save whoever they could. And in order to save whoever you can, that means you talk to the devil, because the devil is the one holding on about to massacre your people. So that's the best way to debunk that stupid argument.
That's the argument I try to make to them. If you had a target on your back and your government was trying to kill you and everybody like you, and you had a chance to get out and escape to another country, wouldn't you do it? Of course you would. And when you put it to them that way, then it kind of sinks in a little bit. But while we're talking about history and World War II, another thing that I'm often attacked for trying to educate people about, I'm a historian. I studied a lot of World War II history. And, when this war started 7 months ago, I tried to tell people right off the bat about the history of the Arab world allying itself with the Axis powers, with Nazi Germany, and particularly the Palestinians. I tried to educate them about Al-Banna and the Muslim Brotherhood and Haj Amin al-Hassani, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, and how he cozied right up to Hitler as soon as Hitler came to power in Germany in 1933, wanted to forge that alliance. And I was attacked for just pointing out history. This is verifiable, accurate, known history, but apparently it isn't being taught in the Western universities, because I get attacked for merely pointing it out, and they tell me that it's not true, that I'm lying. And I'm like, have you ever read a history book, folks? It's like they don't understand also the continuing influence of Nazism in the Palestinian liberation movement. We were talking about Yasser Arafat earlier, And of course, it's a curious thing how after World War II, the Palestinians decided to ally themselves then with the communists, their former enemies, who they tried to kill in the Second World War. Then they suddenly became allies because of the Cold War, trying to destabilize and obliterate Israel and the Israel-America alliance. So, Arafat was literally mentored by the Grand Mufti. He's a cousin of the Grand Mufti, raised at his feet, learned everything he knew from the Grand Mufti. The PLO was trained by Egyptian Nazis, former Nazis that escaped. People don't, when they think of the exodus of Nazis running from prosecution at Nuremberg, they think about South America. They think that they all fled down there, but it's not true. A lot of them went to Arabia and changed their names, took up, sometimes converted to Islam, adopted Arabic names. It was a way to cloak their identity so that Nazi hunters and prosecutors could not find them. And they joined forces with the Arab armies that then invaded Israel in 1948. So they were just kind of continuing their war against the Jews, as I see it. And I'm curious if you think I've got that history about right, and if there's anything you'd like to add.
You have it right. And I only have one more point to add. Like anyone who seriously does not want to accept that history, all they have to do is look up and find out what one of the most popular books in Arabic is, again, across the whole Arab Muslim world. It's Mein Kampf.
It's Mein Kampf.
Written by Hitler.
It is truly a bestseller.
A bestseller in the Arab Muslim world. And again, that's because the Nazis joined up with the Islamists, and they saw. Here's the crazy thing. First of all, I don't know how many people know. Like, a lot of people called Nazis the far right. Nazis were not the far right. Nazis were the far left. It was a socialist movement. Nazi Germany. It was a socialist movement. It's socialism. It's socialism.
National socialism. It's right there in the name.
Marxism, right?
Yep.
So Nazi Germany partnered with the Islam. That's the beginning of the Red-Green Alliance, the Marxist-Islamist alliance. And they were smart. You got to hand it to them. They saw that in Islam there existed an anti-Jew agenda. Mm-hmm. So they decided to ride the wave. Hey, this is fertile ground to give them our Nazi racial hatred of the Jew as well. And that was started by the partnership between Hitler and Haj Amin al-Husseini. And their agreement was that after Hitler exterminated all the Jews of Europe, he was then going to come and help Haj Amin al-Husseini exterminate all the Jews in the whole Middle East. Not just those living in our ancestral homeland, Israel, but throughout the Middle East. And they started to bring Nazi educational materials to enhance the already fertile anti-Jew attitude in Islam, in the Islamic world. And one of the biggest episodes, I don't know whether the word massacre is the correct word to use or not, but I guess you can use massacre. Actually, that was influenced by the Nazi influence in the Arab Muslim world was what's called the Farhud. In Iraq.
In Iraq, 1941.
Right, exactly. So that was influenced by the Nazi influence, where all of a sudden you had Jews living in Iraq since First Temple times. Okay, they're there longer than the first Muslim, because Muhammad only invented Islam in the 7th century. Jews were there since before the turn of the century, right? They're there. First Temple times, Jews were exiled to Babylonia, which then became Iraq, right? The first Muslims are only in the 7th century. So Jews were there when the ancestors of the Muslims were still pagans. They're there longer. And yet, 1941, the Muslims, under the influence of Nazism that was influencing them, all of a sudden started killing their Jewish neighbors in the streets, in their stores. In their
horrible pogroms.
Horrible pogrom, horrible massacre in the streets. And that's what really started the mass exodus of Jews from Iraq, one of the oldest diaspora community of Jews in the world. because, again, they were expelled from Israel after the first temple was destroyed. So, again, first of all, and
not too many Jews living in Iraq today, my friend.
No, I think there are less than 10, right? But again, that's one of the oldest Jewish communities. And again, if anyone is listening and watching and they still think that Israel is this apartheid state, just look at the statistics of population statistics of the Middle East. There used to be hundreds of thousands of Jews in Iraq, tens of thousands in Yemen, in Egypt, in Syria, in Lebanon, in all these Arab countries today. You mostly have zero or you have single-digit number of Jews. Why?
Facts.
Because they had to run away because they were being killed and massacred and persecuted. Israel, you have 9 million citizens, including 2 million Arabs, who are mostly Muslims, some Christians. We have Jews. And I like to tell people, you call Israel an apartheid state? Ready for this one? There's only one country in the Middle East where a Sunni Muslim, a Shiite Muslim, a female Muslim, a gay Muslim, an atheist-born Muslim can live with freedom and equality with Jews and Christians and all other minorities. What's that one country?
Israel.
Right?
That's right.
In Sunni Muslim countries.
And this whole white colonizer narrative is such BS, too. Right? I mean, 2/3 of the population of Israel are people of color.
Are Middle Eastern Jews.
Yes.
Right. We're Jews. We're not white. We're not black. We're not yellow. We're not brown. We come in all colors because of diaspora for thousands of years. We became all colors, but we're all from here. We're called Jews because we're from Judea. We're Jews. That's what we are. That's our identity.
Precisely.
And if you have Jews who listen to you, part of the purpose of my voice and my Pulse of Israel program is, again, through my analysis of current events on a daily basis, is to instill the knowledge and the pride for my fellow Jews to feel proud of their Jewish identity, their ancestral Jewish identity, and in their ancestral Jewish homeland in our modern Jewish state of Israel. Are we perfect? No, because no country is perfect, because countries are run by humans, and humans are not perfect, and human-run organizations are not perfect. But we're trying to be the best we can, and it's ours. And it's ours for thousands of years, and it's our homeland, and it's the only place where we have our own army to defend ourselves and everyone who lives within our country and has citizenship and enjoys the freedom and equality of being citizens of the Jewish state of Israel. So everything people hear in the news that's anti-Israel, it's 180 degrees the opposite. It's usually a lie that covers up the truth about our enemies. It's the Muslims who persecute everybody else except themselves, right? They even persecute fellow Muslims. They kill themselves.
They do.
They kill their daughters if they're raped. I mean, it's insane, but they say this themselves. This is not Avi Abelow. They sanctify death where we sanctify life.
Yes.
Right? They think they're going to get 72 virgins in heaven. They won't believe that? Let them believe whatever they want. I don't care. But do you understand that? They're excited to get to heaven and leave this world. Right? Islam tells you that if you die killing an infidel, you go straight to the 72 virgins and you skip everything. There's other things that the people who didn't do that have to go through when they die. Right? That is Islam. So Americans have to wake up. If you're not standing with the Jew, you're standing with the enemy, your enemy.
And, another one of the false narratives that really bothers me, and I know it must bother you, is when we see things like the Israel flag desecrated with a swastika, and to imply that Zionists are the new Nazis. I'm always trying to tell people, trying to educate them about the true history, and that the influence of Nazi ideology is very much present in the parts of the Arab world, certainly in Palestine, in the Palestinian liberation movement. And here's my theory as to why that is, and maybe you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. After World War II, we saw the denazification of Germany, right? It became illegal to possess a copy of Mein Kampf or a swastika flag or any kind of Nazi imagery or, memorabilia. And it worked, that's why Germany is one of the greatest democracies in Europe today. But it took a generation or more to fully, truly denazify Germany. But that process did not take place in the Middle East. After the war, during the war, the Middle East was propagandized by the Nazis very heavily. Haj Amin al-Assani, the Grand Mufti, of course, was Hitler's propagandist in the Middle East. And Nazi propaganda was spread far and wide. But after the war, nobody bothered to denazify the Middle East. So these ideas continued to take root, to flourish, and it was kind of merged into the schools, right? And generations of children were brought up with that. To this day, they still think Hitler was a Chad. They think the Grand Mufti is a hero. And they have clothing stores in Gaza City called Hitler 1 and Hitler 2. I mean, Hitler chic is a thing. But try and tell American kids that today, and they think you're lying. Right. Am I about right there? Do you think?
Well, I'm going to clarify a little bit. Everything you said is correct, except for one thing. It is impossible to denazify the Arab Muslim community.
You think?
Because no matter how much you denazify it, you can't take out the political movement of Islam, which is about making sure everyone in the world either is Muslim or a slave to Muslims. That can't be neutered unless every Muslim is converted. Meaning,
which predates Nazi Germany by centuries.
Which predates Nazi Germany, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's impossible to denazify the Muslim street. And people say, oh, if we just have a generation of denazifying, then we'll be able to have peace. No. Peace is impossible with the Muslim world. There is no word for peace in Arabic. They don't believe in peace. And I'm a big student of a very well-known international professor and expert on Islam in the Middle East. His name is Dr. Mordechai Kedar. I interview him all the time on my program. And he likes to say this. He goes, there's no peace in the Arab Muslim world. How does the world expect Israel to make peace with the Arab Muslims if within the Arab Muslim world there is no peace? The Sunnis and Shiites, they still kill each other. There is no peace, right? The only way to have a peaceful coexistence with the Arab Muslim world is if you are so strong that you're invincible and they're afraid to lift a finger against you. That is the only way to live peaceful with the Arab Muslim world. Because the second the Arab Muslim world senses that you are weak, they will strike.
Like we just saw Iran sending you all of those lovely missiles recently, right? They sensed that Israel was vulnerable at that moment. And they were going to take advantage of it. So now that we've talked a lot about history, let's bring it up to the present day. And speaking of your channel, I'd like to play a video here from the Pulse of Israel that you just released. This is about the invasion of Rafah. Of course, we've got the airstrikes and all of that is unfolding now. And I thought this was a really, really interesting take. So let's take a look.
We are living in extraordinary times. Israel finally sent the IDF troops back into Gaza, into the southern city of Rafiah, to finally destroy Hamas and save our captives, even though the Biden administration, our greatest ally, has been doing everything to stop us from doing that. And on top of that, the Biden administration literally just betrayed us, Israel, an ally, their only reliable ally in the Middle East, by conspiring with an enemy, Hamas, Iran, Qatar, against us. And those are an enemy with the same aims to destroy America, not just destroy Israel. And if that's not enough, the Biden administration is also now withholding weapons from Israel. As the headline reads, Biden withheld bomb shipment to Israel out of fear it could be used in Rafah. We're at war against Iran and they're withholding bombs from us? It's insane. If anything, the Biden administration is doing a great job at convincing Israelis that we, Israel, can no longer rely on our alliance with America. And we in Israel have to grow some healthy independence for this alliance so that we can't be betrayed like this. So what happened? What took so long for Israel to finally go into Rafah, something we should have done more than 3 months ago in order to save our captives and end the evil Hamas? Why did it finally happen now? And what in the world took place with Hamas announcing via the world media that they had agreed to a ceasefire? Well, let's start by saying this. If we thought that the Biden administration backstabbing of Israel couldn't get worse, it just got much, much worse. And kudos to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu for not buckling to the insane, evil pressure of the Biden administration. The only reason we didn't send the IDF to finish the job in Rafah months ago is because of the tremendous pressure from the Biden administration this whole time, pressuring Israel to capitulate to all of Hamas's demands for a ceasefire and threatening Israel with punishments if we wouldn't capitulate to their demands. We are so blessed to have Prime Minister Netanyahu as Prime Minister, the only realistic Prime Minister option in Israel, who knows how to stand tall and firm, not just in fighting our enemies, but against the horrific pressure from the Obama-Biden administration, and to diplomatically finesse them while still succeeding in moving forward with the war now that we have to fight, even though the Biden administration is still stopping us from fighting it. A war that is the most just war in the world, necessary for us in Israel to ensure that no October 7th massacre ever happens again from Hamas, and that we return our captives, those who are alive and dead. The fact that the Biden administration is betraying us, Israel, U.S. and an ally, and instead helping our enemies and stopping us from doing what any self-respecting country would do to protect its citizens is just plain evil. Now let's take a step back and understand what exactly happened. So let's go back. On Friday, I think, Israel reopened the Erez border crossing from Israel into Gaza, as the Biden administration pressured us to do, in order for more humanitarian aid to get to Hamas in Gaza. Now, this is the same Erez border crossing that Hamas attacked on October 7th, killing our IDF soldiers who manned that IDF base crossing and destroying the base. Hamas immediately attacked the base on Sunday, killing a number of IDF soldiers and injuring others. Don't act surprised, but soon after this Hamas attack on an IDF base, that, again, this base is used to help Hamas, get them aid, an attack that killed IDF soldiers, the Biden administration pressured Netanyahu again to open up that same base to give more aid in order to send it to Hamas in Gaza. Biden doesn't care about the fact that Hamas is biting the hand that is feeding it, attacking this base that is used for humanitarian aid to them, and killing IDF soldiers. No, Biden just cares about giving the perpetrators of the October 7th massacre humanitarian aid and making Israel look bad. My guess is that after Hamas attacked the crossing base, killing IDF soldiers on Sunday, together with the fact that Hamas said no to the latest ceasefire deal, that Israel basically capitulated to all of Hamas' demands due against the immoral pressure from the Biden administration, that with those two things together, it finally pushed the Israeli war cabinet to give the green light to send the IDF into Gaza once again with the attack on Rafah. Thankfully, the spirit and motivation of the IDF soldiers is sky high, as there are so many video clips coming out of Gaza right now or before going in, showing their spirit, knowing they're going in for the right reasons. And now, look at this clip of IDF forces back at the southern end of Gaza flying the Israeli flag as they drive by the border with Egypt. Now, almost immediately after Israel sent in the first IDF forces into Gaza, Hamas put out a press release, reported upon all over the world, that it had agreed to the ceasefire, basically showing the world that Israel is the bad guy saying no to the ceasefire. Everyone was totally confused. Even I and everyone in Israel, well, they're like, what's going on? The anti-Netanyahu media in Israel went into a panic attack with horrific reporting, automatically blaming Netanyahu for killing the ceasefire deal for political reasons. So what really happened? Well, this headline says it all. Israeli officials. The U.S. knew about changes to ceasefire deal, but it didn't brief Israel. And as reported by Axios, CIA Director Bill Burns and other Biden administration officials who are involved in the negotiations knew about the new proposal, but didn't tell Israel. The Israeli officials also said the last touches on the proposal were made on Monday morning in Doha with the Biden administration's knowledge. On Monday morning, Burns spoke on the phone with Israeli Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant. A source with knowledge of the call said, but when Hamas released its statement, the Israeli minister was also surprised. Two Israeli officials said the feeling is that Israel got played by the United States and the mediators who drafted the New Deal and weren't transparent about it. Between the lines, two Israeli officials said that Israel is deeply suspicious that the Biden administration gave guarantees to Hamas through the Egyptian and Qatari mediators about its key demand that a hostage deal will lead to the end of the war. We see quite clearly that the Biden administration's backstabbing of Israel just got even deeper. That whole ceasefire fiasco that Hamas agreed to, it was orchestrated by the Biden administration. They are literally working together with Hamas, Iran, and Qatar against Israel, trying to make us look bad and stop us from finishing this just war against Hamas in Gaza. Understand, I've said this before, this Biden administration is evil. Netanyahu's number one goal is not just to defeat Hamas, but to survive the evil backstabbing Biden administration until election time, since every day of this administration is a danger to Israel's existence. It's insane because they are working hand in hand with our enemies. Understand, we, the Jewish people and the Jewish state of Israel, will survive this backstabbing of the Biden administration. Nobody should ever forget, the Bible is clear. Those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be cursed. Biden and his administration, including the Jewish people in his administration, have chosen the wrong side. They chose to support evil. Bad choice. They are forgetting the lesson of history. Never take on the Jews. You take on the Jews, you take on God, and you end up losing big time. Now, I want you to be inspired by this scene of our IDF soldiers being blessed before entering into Gaza as they went into Rafiah to destroy the evil Arab Muslim enemy responsible for massacring our 1,200 plus innocent Jews on October 7th. If Biden and his administration truly didn't want to see the destruction and refugees in Gaza, then all they would have to do is send the genocidal Gazans to Egypt, because there are no innocent Gazans. Just watch this video I did months ago. All Gazans either took part or celebrated in the horrific October 7th massacre. They are all Hamas, and that's all part of the radical Islam that they believe in. Biden should be pressuring Hamas, Iran, and Qatar to return our captives. He should have done that October 8th and tell our enemies never to attack Israel again. But he hasn't been pressuring them. He's been pressuring us. This is what the Biden administration should be doing instead of siding with our enemies, because if they really cared about peace, justice, and saving lives, they would be doing that. In the meantime, we, the proud King David-like warriors of Jews today in our ancestral homeland Israel, will do what we have to do despite the world pressure and the Biden administration's pressure against us. And God above, please watch over our holy IDF soldiers, because they are not just protecting the Jewish people in Israel, they are fighting on the front line for the whole freedom-loving world against the growing Marxist Islamist revolution out to destroy the whole freedom-loving world. This is Avi Abelow signing off for another belief-based, inspiring, politically incorrect Pulse of Israel episode. If you are not yet a subscriber, go to pulseofisrael.com and click to subscribe. And if you support the work we're doing, you want to help us get our videos seen by more people, click on the donate button every once in a while. Shalom, everybody, and remember, Israel Chai.
Pulse of Israel, frontline videos from the Holy Land. Support our work by donating today.
Oh, sorry about that. A little glitch. You know, I totally agree with you that the Biden administration is betraying our ally. And I often look at that. Of course, I'm a historian, so I try to find a historical precedent for everything. But I look at it as, what if we had said that to Great Britain in 1940? because I see a similarity there. Small islands surrounded by enemies. They were being bombed by the Nazis from the skies. The Nazis made it clear that they intended to occupy and conquer England. And they were pretty defenseless. And there was a movement, as you know, in the United States back then called America First. And of course, their take was, look, that's Europe's problem. We don't want any part of it. Let's focus on our country. And had we abandoned our ally, Great Britain, as we know it, would not exist today. They'd all be speaking German and eating schnitzel. And that's also true of the Soviet Union. You know, if it wasn't for Lend-Lease, 27 million roughly Soviets were killed by the Nazis. That death toll would have been much, much higher. It would have been a mass genocide like none we've ever seen. So our alliances are very, very important. And it shocks and appalls me, to be honest, Avi, when I see us turning our back on Israel like this in your time of need. If there was ever a time of need, this is it.
Yeah, and it's I want to add it onto that point because most people do not understand the importance of our alliance, not for Israel, but for America. And I'm actually going to quote former Secretary of State Alexander Haig from the 1980s. I don't have the quote right in front of me. Let me see if I can get it. 1 second, because it's
Is that the aircraft carrier quote?
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Aircraft carrier, right? So Alexander Haig, Israel is the largest American aircraft carrier in the world that cannot be sunk, does not carry even one American soldier, and is located in a critical region for American national security. Meaning for every dollar that America gives in aid to Israel, we are providing a tremendous amount of technology, intelligence. Americans don't know, like for every plane or weapon that you create, we are creating the technology that America then implements on all of the hardware you're putting together, meaning we are a true alliance. And
Right.
I want to bring Americans to understand and American politicians to understand that you need us just like we need you. Don't think like we're this poor nation that needs your money. No, we can go at it alone, but you are also going to suffer if you don't have our alliance. We're helping America in so many ways. Again, as Alexander Haig, a former Secretary of State of America, said. So that's important for Americans to understand, that don't take Israel for granted either, because we provide a lot to help you be safe and in America.
There's a cognitive dissonance, it seems, in the anti-Israel crowd, that they, on the one hand, they say that the Jews control America, and they, pull our politicians around like puppets on a string. And then at the same time, they say they look upon Israel as, this poor nation that always needs a handout, right? That's dependent upon America for its survival. So how can both be true? They can't be. It's got to be one or the other. But the truth is what you just said. It's really more of a win-win partnership. It's not a handout to Israel because you can't defend yourselves. But you do need our help. And I agree with you that our partnership is vital in the Middle East because, yes, you guys have been defending our interest in our country for so very long.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you brought up in terms of the both sides, because Jew hatred is irrational.
Exactly.
And the best way to understand just the proof that it's irrational is because there's no logic to it. On the one hand, they say that we control America. On the other hand, they say that we can't exist without America. On one side of the ocean, one side of the political camp says that we're communists and we're ruining America. The other side says we're capitalists and we're ruining America. Meaning, everybody comes up with their own thinking of why we're horrible and ruining America, and it's just like throwing putty up on the wall. Whatever sticks. None of it makes sense. And again, people have to understand, just like there are all types of Christians, You can have a religious Christian. You can have a non-religious Christian. You can have a conservative Christian. You can have a liberal Christian. You can have an independent Christian. Same thing for the Jews. We got right-wing Jews. We got left-wing Jews. We got religious Jews. We got non-religious Jews. We got communist Jews. We got capitalist Jews. And yeah, there are Jews everywhere in every camp. And believe it or not, I mean, yes, there are Jews at the heads of all of these movements. All the movements. Why? Because the Jewish people were a driven people. One, were driven to survive. Think about this. Every generation there are people out there trying to destroy us. So sometimes Jews are thinking, wait, how am I going to I don't want to be destroyed. I don't want to be killed. So how am I going to get out of not being killed? Oh, let me join a movement that is running things so I can assimilate and get out of being labeled a Jew. So I become a communist, or I become a socialist, or I become a Republican, or I become this, and I don't practice my Jewish lifestyle anymore according to our traditions for thousands of years. And then also the other aspect of being a Jew is part of our DNA, part of our Jewishness is trying to make the world a better place. And again, I believe that means, I don't believe, I know it because I know my Bible. Making the world a better place under the kingship of God. I'm not supposed to run away from my Jewish identity. It's by me living my Jewish identity that I then spread the goodness of God. But then you have many Jews out there who they become communists. They're not Jewish anymore. They're not living a Jewish lifestyle. They don't keep the Sabbath. They don't keep our dietary laws. They're not keeping any laws. All of a sudden, there's communists because they've been brainwashed to think that being a communist means making a better world. And today's religion in the Democrat Party is climate change. So you have a lot of Jews who are part of climate change. They're not. That's it. Why are they involved? Because they believe that's a way of being a good person, and hence they say, "I'm a proud Jew because I'm involved with climate change." Their Jewish identity and their lives, no connection. They're not doing anything Jewish in their lives, but they think they're being a good Jew because they're trying to help the world because they've been brainwashed that climate change is the thing to make the world a better place. So yeah, Jews are everywhere. But to say that Jews run the world, the Jewish people, the state of Israel, the Zionists run the world, that's all a bunch of, it's insane. It's like there's no.
What a bunch of hooey.
Exactly. I was trying to keep my mouth clean. But yeah, I mean, but again, to drive it to the truth, because that's what I'm about, is the truth is, yes, the Jewish people, and again, I'm a believing Jew. I live my life according to the Bible and according to how my ancestors have lived for thousands of years. God tells the Jewish people to follow the Bible, and according to the Bible, we're not just supposed to keep the Sabbath and dietary laws and all our holidays. We're supposed to live in our homeland Israel. And it's only by us living our lives as Jews, meaning representing God by following his laws, living in the land he gives to us to live in, that's how we change the world. Not by impacting the world, but by living who we're supposed to be, and then being an example of God and in the world for then to influence the world, for the world to be a better place. So yeah, I want the world to be a better place, but I understand it's an internal process. And Israel,
Right.
it's today, we have plenty of things to still fix, and we're not, the Jewish state of Israel is not the Jewish state of Israel that I believe it's supposed to be. But we're here doing it, and even though we're a tiny people, 9 million people, small in the state of New Jersey, we're punching way above our weight. We help with technology all over the world. We help with medical stuff all over the world. We help with disasters all over the world because we're experts at disasters, like unfortunately, but we get to help countries all over the world. So we're punching so above our weight and helping the world, and yet people come up with lies because of this irrational Jew hatred.
And it is completely irrational. You know, something I try to explain to people that hate Jews, hate Israel, is I ask them, have you ever been there? And of course, the answer is always no. And I say, you should visit and go find out for yourself just what a liberal democracy Israel really is, as we were talking before the show, that I think that in many ways Israel is far more democratic and free than the United States or Canada. And evidence of that is seen in these protests, these huge protests that we're seeing in the street against Prime Minister Netanyahu. And they're allowed to continue. They've been going on for years before this war even broke out. Can you explain to our viewers why those protests are happening now and where that's coming from?
Okay, so I don't know where your viewers are on the political spectrum in America, but I'm going to use American political reality as an analogy to help people understand. All right?
Please.
Regardless of how much someone hates Trump or loves Trump, I think everyone can understand that there is a political crusade against Trump. Right? The American, whether you call it the deep state, whether you call it the justice system, together with politics, media, right? For years, there's been a crusade against Trump to try to take down Trump. And hence you have a very strong public sentiment that is anti-Trump. And again, anyone who knows the history of Trump and even American media, you should be shocked. I remember when, and because I grew up in New York City, Trump was the darling of the media. He was the darling of the Democratic Party.
Yes,
he was a huge donor. Hillary Clinton loved him. I'm sure he gave money to Bill Clinton, right? They all loved him. Oprah Winfrey used to have him on his show, and she used to gush over him, right? So don't tell me how horrible Trump is because of his personality and how he hates blacks and how he's horrible to workers and he's a racist and anti-Semite. It's a crusade of lies to take down Trump. All right?
Yes, I
the
agree.
same exact thing. And again, I'm not trying to convince anyone pro-Trump, no Trump elections. Nothing to do with that. I'm just trying to break down reality to understand that's really what's going on in America on a political level. The same thing is happening in Israel. There is a political, a cultural elite in Israel that hate Netanyahu. They hate him. And they have this protest movement against him. It's only a protest in the streets now. Like, over the past few years at the height that it's been. But the crusade started against him back in the 1990s when he first became prime minister in 1996. Okay, I was living here. I moved to Israel in 1990. I was here when he became prime minister. The turn on him was immediate. He was a very successful ambassador to the United Nations for Israel. Very well liked, very respected. The second he became prime minister, the country, not the country, because he was voted as prime minister, the elite, and again, we're talking a leftist, progressive Israeli elite in Israel, turned on him and have been trying to take him down ever since. If I could tell you the billions of dollars that have been used by the government and the justice system to try to take down Netanyahu in these 28 years, it's astronomical.
Let me ask
you're
you,
talking about 28 years of...
do you believe that the United States is seeding these protests? I could call them rent-a-riots. Not just here in the States, but the anti-Netanyahu protests. It's interesting to me that the protests fired up again at the exact same time that we saw Senator Chuck Schumer and President Biden calling for regime change in Israel. And I thought, are we seeding those protests? Trying to do a Maidan coup kind of thing.
So let me give some context to help people understand a greater level the answer that I'm going to give you. I like to explain that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is our wall of China standing up against a very, very destructive foreign policy agenda of the U.S. foreign policy establishment. It's not a Biden thing. It's not even a Democratic thing. It's the U.S. foreign policy establishment that has been going on, whether the president was Republican or Democrat. The only president to buck the U.S. the destructive U.S. foreign policy for Israel was President Trump. He's the only one. Okay, what's that foreign policy directive? That is to weaken Israel and create and take away our land and give it to this fake people who call themselves Palestinians, and have this two-state solution with the creation of a Palestinian state on our ancestral land, and making us be endangered existentially every single day, because they have no intention of ever living in peace with us. Their intention is to replace us and throw us into the sea. That is the two-state solution is what we still hear, and that the Biden administration is pushing. That's not just a Biden policy. That's not just a Democratic policy. That's the U.S. foreign policy establishment. Hence,
And by the way, I'm sure you heard that former President Trump just this week put out a statement saying, because he was a longtime believer in the two-state solution,
right?
Says he no longer supports it, which is the correct position. It shows that he is the only presidential candidate in the race who understands the reality of what's happening now in the Middle East. And meanwhile, all of the others seem to be living in an October 6th reality, still having that two-state delusion. Which the majority of Israelis don't support, and of course Hamas and the Palestinians don't want it. So who are we to force that upon two parties that absolutely positively don't want it?
Correct. So now the Biden administration is the face of the U.S. foreign policy establishment, and now they're faced with a reality where Israel will never agree to a two-state solution. Vast majority, over 95% of Israeli society, will never agree to giving self-rule to any Arabs within our land, because we could just have another October 7th. And yet the Biden administration is still trying to push it, and it still has Israeli politicians who are poodles to them that will go along and make that happen. So the only strong politician in Israel who is stopping them from forcing us to commit suicide is Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So now we get to your question. Has America or American money been influencing the protest, the anti-Netanyahu, the anti-government protest movement, to topple it, to then be replaced by a government that would, in a sense, be a poodle to the Biden administration? Now, I can't show you proof, but I will tell you 99.9%, even without showing you the proof, because I'm pretty well versed with the history of CIA, State Department, color revolutions all over the world to comfortably say that, oh yeah, for sure they're involved in trying to topple the Netanyahu government here. Not just now, but also the judicial reform that they were involved. And how do I know that? Because when Secretary of State Anthony Blinken came to Israel before October 7th, again, when the judicial reform protest movement was trying to topple the government, who did he meet? He made sure to meet the leaders of the protest movement. Why should the Secretary of State of the most powerful country in the world be taking time out of his 1 or 2 day visit in a foreign country to be meeting the leaders of the protest movement trying to topple a government? This was headline news. It wasn't even done secretly. So even without having the proof and the actual receipts that the money is funneling to these protesters and the leaders of the protest movement, and buying their tents or paying for the printing up of all their materials and protests, I think it is pretty safe to assume that using the history of the CIA and the State Department in bringing about regime changes in other countries with color revolutions, that they have been involved, and they're still involved today in trying to topple Netanyahu.
Couldn't agree more. As a student of history myself, the State Department has always been infested with anti-Semites since before World War II. After World War II, they have continued to kind of run the State Department and a lot of our foreign policy. I do another podcast called Hidden History Revealed. And my first 3 episodes were about the infiltration of former Nazi agents into American life and Canadian life and our intelligence services and our military. But there was a researcher.
And NASA. CIA and NASA was started with lots of Nazi manpower that America brought in. So
That's right. From Germany, from Ukraine. And one of the reasons that we know this now is because of a law that was passed here in 1998 by Congress called the Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act. That's where we got a lot of these documents that prove it. And the guy responsible for the Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act was a man named John Loftus. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but he uncovered these files in his work as a Department of Justice Nazi hunter in the 1970s. So he wrote a book that I find fascinating, and I recommend it to anyone who's interested in learning more about the United States' consistent betrayal of our ally Israel over the last 50 or 60 years. It's called The Secret War Against the Jews by John Loftus.
Of course, I read that years ago.
Yeah, you know that
Fabulous
book? It is a great book.
fabulous.
Really opened my eyes to a lot of stuff. And of course, I think John Loftus sums it up really well, and I want to see if you agree with his summary. When people ask, but why do we betray Israel when we share values? It doesn't make any sense, but it does when you look at it this way. And the way that he put it was, look, Israel's a little country that doesn't have any oil, and the Arabs have all the oil. Whose side do you think we're going to be on?
100%. And the other, following that, it's very easy. Just look at how many State Department and CIA staff members owe their careers to working in one or more of the Arab Muslim countries. You're talking about hundreds or thousands that they owe their careers to the relationships they have in the Arab Muslim world. Then how many State Department officials work with Israel? Well, very few. And many of them only come to work with Israel after they already work with the Arab Muslim world. So where is their bread getting buttered? And what are they looking to do after they finish their careers in the CIA or State Department? They're looking at cushy jobs in one of those think tanks or lobby groups in Washington, funded by who? Funded by their connections in the Arab Muslim world. So the cards are stacked against the Jewish state of Israel in Washington, D.C. And that's why the only way we were able to have a friend in the White House was when he came from the outside. He wasn't an insider. It's Donald Trump who had his own understanding, brought in his own people, independence, and he was not tied to a past of knowledge and interest and personal interest because of working in the Washington, D.C. circles connected to the Arab Muslim world that owns Washington. Like if people think America, the Jews run Washington or Israel, guys, Arab Muslim oil runs Washington more than the Jews.
Runs the world, I might argue. The whole world. Most of Europe, everywhere except Israel. Right? Yeah, so that's one of the reasons why you must feel so alone in the world right now.
Yeah, but you want to know something? Again, it comes from my strong understanding and belief as a religious Bible-believing Jew, because God in the Bible tells us we will be a nation that lives alone. Meaning that doesn't mean that we won't have friends around the world, but it means like we have to know. I mean, it's written from the Bible. This is 3,000 plus years old, that document, the oldest document that will never be changed, no matter what the progressive world wants to try to rewrite history. God told us, like, you guys are going to have to stand alone in the world, but you're never alone because I'm with you. Right. And that's when that's when things change. When we truly own our identity, we stop trying to rely on outside forces, and instead we rely on ourselves together with our belief in God above. That's when the world will turn towards us as well. And again, even though we're a nation that stands alone, God also tells us in the Bible that the temple, it's not just supposed to be a temple for the Jews. It's a temple, as Isaiah tells us, where all the nations of the world will come and pray to the one God. We'll all have different religions, but we'll all have the understanding there's only one God, even though we practice our religious rituals differently. So we are supposed to be different. So I'm saying we're supposed to be alone by being different and being connected to God above and understanding he's there for us. And then when we fulfill our purpose as our people in our homeland, that's when the whole world's going to come to us, because they're going to accept, like, yeah, there's one world, and they're going to come visit Jerusalem to also pray at the temple.
And there you are in Jerusalem, so you know of what you speak. But That's not what Candace Owens tells us.
Oh boy.
I recently interviewed Rabbi Michael Barclay on the show. Of course, you know, he had this big public spat with Candace and an interview that may have had something to do with her departure from the Daily Wire. I wanted to ask you, because I'm a Christian, what do you make of this whole new tactic that's being used to divide the long alliance between American Christians and Jews with all this Christ is King business? And, what do you think about all that?
Listen, it is very sad because at the end of the day, the people who are going to suffer the most from this crisis and this split is not the Jews, it's the Christians, because
Yes.
they are misguiding all those influencers, taking their followers to believe all that BS stuff. They're going to be the ones kicked in the behind, because we're going to come out okay. We're the Jewish people. God's watching over us. We're going to get kicked and beaten. We're going to come out of it. But the Christians, we're your front line. We're standing up for you.
Yes.
Again, in this Marxist Islamist battle out to get all of us. Again, first the Saturday people, then the Sunday people. You cut off from us and you start supporting our enemies. Well, you're supporting your enemies. You're next in line. And it's just so sad. And what's even sadder is any Christian should understand their whole identity is based on the Jewish identity.
True.
Jesus was Jewish. Jesus worked in the temple. Jesus was born in Bethlehem as a Jew. You don't have your identity without Jesus, the Jew, who then Christianity was based off of him. Now, I'm all fine with that. I believe the existence of Christianity shows the success of Judaism, because Judaism is supposed to show that there is one true God in the world. Not everyone has to be a Jew. We don't proselytize to convert people. Christianity proselytizes. Muslims proselytize. They believe everyone has to be Muslim. We don't believe that. If you're Jewish, you're Jewish. We have to keep 613 commandments. It's not easy to be a Jew. We're hated in every single generation. We're not convincing anyone to be Jewish. We just want you to be good people and believe in God and follow the 7 Noahide laws, which are pretty basic, that most people do anyway, because that's true morality. And yet Christians are turning on the Jew. You are pulling the rug out from your own Christian identity, which means you have no clue what it means to be Christian if you're throwing the Jew out as the bad person and the Jewish people out as the enemy.
And do you think, again, I keep seeing these parallels to history. The Nazis used that in their propaganda. There was this perversion of Christianity. It was part of what they used to justify exclusion and eventually extermination of the Jews. Do you see that being recycled now? I see so much Nazi propaganda coming back for an encore.
Yeah, I didn't look at that specifically, but you can. Yeah, it's very similar, and it's very sad, and it's very sad.
It makes me
again,
sad as a Christian when I see the flock being led astray by bad shepherds, not good shepherds.
So I actually interviewed a Reverend Hallie Ace, I think her name is, who runs an organization of I think it's a Christians Action Against Anti-Semitism, I think is the name, or could be, forgive me if that's not the right name. And she and her husband, both pastors, spend their time educating Christians about their true Christian identity to help them understand why they should be fighting anti-Semitism, why it's in their best interests for their Christian lives in order to stand up and not hate Jews, but to be actively fighting anti-Semitism, because if the Jew's taken down, then the Christian will be taken down. So they are active in that fight within the Christian community. And I was blown over to learn about that. And that was
That's excellent.
Unbelievable.
Oh, we need so much more of that right now. And that's kind of the purpose of this interview too is to have this dialogue between us, to build solidarity between us. I think we need that. And I do want to play another video of yours. This is a brief one, because I want to give people once again a wake-up call about the mindset that we are in fact dealing with when we are talking about Hamas.
Every person in the world must listen to what this father of a captive in Gaza has to say. This is why we are fighting in Gaza.
ראיתי סרטונים, שאף אחד לא ראה פה. נאלצתי לראות. והיה 7 לאוקטובר בישראל, בעוטף, והיה 7 באוקטובר בתוך עזה. שם ראיתי דברים, שמה שהייתם, אם הייתם רואים אותם, הייתם מדברים אחרת. אני 4 ימים לא ישן. עשרות חטופים נגרעים ממכוניות, כשהפנים שלהם על הכביש. אין להם פנים כבר. הם האזרחים, העזתים, האנשים והילדים, תולשים להם איברים. על מה את מדברת? על מה אתם מדברים? אתם חייבים לראות את זה. אני אומר שפה, אם אנחנו מדברים על חינוך ולהעביר מסר לעולם, צריך להראות את הסרטים כמה שהם קשים, ואני לא יכול לישון בגללה. אני אומר לכם, שאנחנו מדברים על בני שטן, אין עם מי לדבר, אין פה עסקה, רק להיכנס ולהשמיד אותם. זה דעתי, והבן שלי שם. עידן שלי עובר שם התעללויות. אני בפעימה הראשונה יצאתי ואמרתי, לא, קודם נשים וילדים. כי זה מה שעידן גם היה בוחר. כששמעתי את העדויות מהמשוחררות, הבנתי שעשיתי טעות, ואני מבקש סליחה מעידן שלי. הן מודיעות ומסבירות לנו שבעצם אונסים שם גברים, מתעללים בהם, מלבישים אותם כמו נשים, מגלחים אותם. חייבים לשמוע את הדברים האלו.
This is how you understand how there are no innocent civilians in Gaza. This is why no Arab Muslims in Gaza can remain in Gaza. This is why the Jewish people are fighting the creation of a state called Palestine, because this is our enemy in Gaza, Judea and Samaria, and all over the Middle East. We're going to win, everybody. But understand, this is why we're fighting. AntiIsrael Chai.
That is such a powerful video, and I had to show that. It's stunning to me, Avi, that the United States, that the international community, after what happened on October 7th, would even consider rewarding Hamas and the Palestinians with statehood. How do we make that make sense? It's a reward for doing evil, is it not?
Yeah, and I personally, I wasn't able to sleep after hearing his father's testimony in Israel's parliament and visualizing all that stuff. People have to understand. We, the Jewish people, we're a tiny people. I think out of the 9 million, we're 7 million Jews in Israel today. There are around 7-8 million more Jews around the world. I think we're a total of 15.5 million today. Believe it or not, there are less Jews in the world today than there were pre the Holocaust. We still haven't replenished the number of Jews since 6 million were murdered in the Holocaust by the Nazis. And yet it's hard for Jews to understand, and it might be hard for others as well. There is a natural hatred of the Jew that exists in the world. That's why Jew hatred is irrational. It just exists. That's why people are just, college campuses until October 7th, everyone was talking about microaggressions. Like, don't you dare use the wrong pronouns, right? Like, you'd be punished. You'd be you'd be shamed for using the wrong pronouns. Microaggressions, right? All of a sudden, those same students are now screaming pro-genocide chants and not being punished. It's like, what is going on? Why is that allowed? How does that make sense? It only makes sense because it's okay to hate the Jew. It's okay to hate the Jew. Everyone's
and, as long as you just lie and say, I'm anti-Zionist, I'm not anti-Jew, it's the Zionists we need to kill. But they're literally saying we need to kill the Zionists at Columbia University, at your alma mater. I know we're almost out of time, but I just had to ask this question since you did go to Columbia. And in fact, I recently had a guest on the show, a history blogger, Jewish lady named Naomi Allen. She lives in South Africa now, but she's American, from New York. And she told me something chilling because I asked her, how does it make you feel when you see these protests on the campuses calling for killing the Zionists? How does that make you feel? And she said, it makes me feel for the first time in my life that the Holocaust could happen again. And she said, if it happens, it won't be in Germany. It won't be in Europe. It's going to start in America. And she specifically said, and this is before the Columbia protests began, she said, it's going to start in New York City. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that as a Columbia grad and a New York City guy yourself. Do you think she's onto something there?
For sure. And again, just to connect it with before, the question before. So yeah, the reason why the whole world is ignoring the evil we're up against, the evil that took place on October 7th, the evil that they're still holding on to the captives and what they're doing to our captives, and the fact they're evil, and not just Hamas, it's all of them. There's no innocence there. They're all they're brainwashed. They're evil. The children are, or he said, the children are ripping out limbs from our captives' bodies. It's just because of Jew hatred. That's why they're going to continue and punish the Jew and beat the Jew, and even U.S. foreign policy, because again, it still has the Nazi influence and the Jew hatred influence even within Washington. Of course, it can happen in America and start in New York, because New York is the capital of the progressive mindset of America. Columbia University, again, it's also Berkeley, it's also other universities, but New York is biggest population, influential people. The politics is progressive,
and the capital of American Jews too.
And the most, as the largest population of American Jews in one city. So for sure it could start there. And again, people all these years, they always told me, oh, there's never going to be another Holocaust, never going to be a Holocaust in America. And I always told people, listen, I'm a student of history, student of Jewish history. We're always persecuted, and every generation it's in some other way. Saying that there's going to be another Holocaust doesn't mean it's going to take place the same way. It's not that the American government is going to build concentration camps and take the Jews off on Amtrak trains to concentration camps. I don't see that happening. It's not going to be the same thing. But I can tell you what I do see happening.
What's that? Because
I see this zombie apocalypse on the college campuses. Well, in a few weeks, those zombies might be in the middle of New York City in the streets, and all of a sudden burning down synagogues, and then pulling Jews out of stores and starting to beat them up, or running through Jewish communities and starting to beat them up and kill people in their homes. And there's not going to be any police, and the National Guard isn't going to be called in. So it won't be the same persecution and massacre of Jews as took place in Nazi Germany. But let's say that starts in New York, and then it goes to all the major cities where you have Jewish populations. And again, it's not
pogroms.
Just Jews going to be
pogroms, like American pogroms.
You're going to have non-Jews are going to be affected by that too, because these zombies, they're zombies. They're not asking you, are you Jewish or not? They're just thinking if you're Jewish or not. Or you standing next to a Jew? What do you look like a Jew? Or you're protecting a Jew? Plenty of non-Jews are going to get hurt if that ends up happening. You're talking about zombies. We see
Avi,
them. They are zombies.
Every single day on social media. And in our chat room, I get asked, are you a Jew, Lori? Are you a Jew? And what's it to you? Why do you care so much? If what my faith is, it shouldn't matter. But you can tell by the way they ask, are you a Jew? Like they're putting you on a list we're going to come back and get you later. It's very intimidating and wrong.
Right. Right. Well, you
My
can
friend-
tell them from now. Next time you get that, you can say, "I'm not, but I have a friend in Israel. He's a proud Jew. I could put you in touch with him."
Yes. You know, my answer is always, I'm not a Jew, but I wish I was. I wish I was.
Wow. We'd love to have you, Lori, but you're doing your job in the Christian community, so I want you to stay there and make your impact.
Well, I stand proudly with you. I stand proudly with Israel, and I'm not ashamed to say that I'm a Zionist. I don't think it's a dirty word. I don't think it should be controversial to believe that Israel simply has a right to exist and defend herself. And we live in crazy upside-down clown world when people believe otherwise. To believe otherwise is a genocidal belief in itself, and yet they accuse Israel of committing the genocide. So I'll give you the last word, Avi. What would you like to tell our listeners? Is there anything that you think I didn't cover or neglected?
You know what? I'm gonna segue with your bringing up the term Zionism to help educate people about that word.
Sure.
Zionism comes from the word Zion. Christians should know this. Zion is another name for Jerusalem. It's part of our identity. There is no Jew not connected to Israel. If you meet a Jew who says he's an anti-Zionist, that means he's repudiated his or her Jewish identity. They don't know what it means to be a Jew, and they're just spewing BS out of their mouth. Zion is Jerusalem. Jerusalem is our ancestral capital since King David's time, 3,000 plus years ago. So Zionism is just the Jewish right to live in our ancestral homeland with our ancestral capital, Jerusalem. Jews lived in Jerusalem before they were British in Britain, before they were Italians in Rome, before they were Babylonians, before they were Persians. We were living in Jerusalem before everything else you know in history. So don't try to say that the Jews have nothing to do with Judaism and that Zionism is a bad word. Zionism is synonymous with Jerusalem, which is the Jewish capital for 3,000 plus years. No one try to trump me on that one. You can't. Your ancestors haven't been in America longer than my ancestors have been connected to Jerusalem. Forget about it. And I'm more of an American than many of you probably. I'm a 5th, 6th generation American. Right, but even that,
I always try to tell people that there's another trope that is just a lie. They say that Jewish Americans are not real Americans because their first loyalty is to Israel, and I totally disagree with that. I find that Zionist Jewish Americans are some of our proudest and most patriotic citizens who truly love this country, and you can see it every day at these protests. Whenever you see some Jews show up to counter protest, they bring the American flag, y'all, not just the flag of Israel. Right. So I want to encourage everyone. Yeah, go ahead.
No, and the final
we've got like 60 seconds.
60 seconds. I want to challenge everyone to look up how many times Jerusalem is mentioned in the Bible, and it's over 300 times, versus how many times Jerusalem is mentioned in the Quran.
Zero.
That tells you the whole thing that you're being lied to by everything in the media about Jews and Israel. How's that for an ending?
Excellent. This was a great interview. I've been looking forward to it so much. And folks, please do check out pulseofisrael.com. Check out Avi's YouTube channel. You'll find a lot of educational videos there that'll really open your eyes about things. You are a great student of history, and I appreciate the way that you represent your country and your people, and you're spreading the truth, because here at Maverick News, we're all just seeking the truth, and we're living in a sea of lies out there and propaganda on social media. Nobody knows what to believe or what to trust. So I encourage you all to do your own research, think for yourselves, and if you are of a religious faith, to consult your religious texts as well. So, Avi, thank you so much. We barely scratched the surface in 2 hours, so let's do this again when we can talk another 2 hours.
Thank you so much for having me. And as I like to say, Lori, everyone should use their God-given common sense.
There you go. That's exactly right. And let's all pray for peace. Good night, everyone.
In a universe full of ideas, we draw lightness from the dark to a place where opposites attract. Right meets left. Positive touches negative, sparking an explosion of truth. Because politics makes strange bedfellows.
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.